In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, a woman named Frau Troffea walked into the street and began to dance. Nobody was playing music. Nobody had asked her to. She simply started dancing. She danced for 6 days straight. She didn't stop to eat. She didn't stop to sleep. Her feet bled through her shoes, and she could not stop. Within a week, 34 other people had joined her. Within a month, the number had grown to 400. Some of them danced until their hearts gave out. Physicians were called. They examined the dancers and concluded the cure was more dancing. They hired musicians to keep the rhythm going. They built a stage. People kept dying, and nobody could explain why any of it was happening. This is the dancing plague of 1518, and it is one of the strangest events in recorded human history. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city under enormous pressure. A series of famines had left thousands of people hungry. Disease was spreading. The population was exhausted and frightened and deeply, desperately religious. The Catholic Church dominated every aspect of daily life, and in that world, certain saints were believed to curse those who angered them with specific afflictions. Saint Vitus, in particular, was said to curse sinners with compulsive, uncontrollable dancing. When Frau Troffea began dancing in the street on a July morning, nobody immediately thought of disease. They thought of Saint Vitus. What happened next defied every explanation they had. The spread was rapid and deeply unsettling. One person dancing compulsively could be explained. Perhaps madness, perhaps grief, but 10 people, 50, 400. Contemporary accounts describe the dancers as wild-eyed and exhausted, many of them weeping, clearly in distress, clearly not wanting to dance. Their bodies simply wouldn't stop. City officials documented the outbreak carefully. Municipal records from Strasbourg confirm that the dancing began in July 1518 and continued for approximately 2 months. This is not legend or folklore. It is a documented historical event, recorded by multiple independent sources at the time it occurred. The physicians who examined the dancers ruled out supernatural causes and diagnosed the affliction as a natural disease, caused by hot blood. Their prescribed treatment: keep the dancers moving, hire musicians, build a stage, was based on the belief that the fever driving the compulsion needed to burn itself out. Instead, people began to die of heart attacks, of strokes, of sheer exhaustion. At the peak of the outbreak, the city records suggest that 15 people were dying every day. Eventually, after roughly 2 months, the dancing stopped, as suddenly and as mysteriously as it had begun. Frau Troffea, who had started it all, was taken to a shrine of Saint Vitus. What happened to her after that? History does not record. In the centuries since, historians and medical researchers have proposed several explanations for what happened in Strasbourg that summer. The most widely accepted theory today is mass psychogenic illness, what used to be called mass hysteria. Under conditions of extreme stress, fear, and social pressure, groups of people can develop shared physical symptoms with no biological cause. The body genuinely produces the symptoms. The suffering is real, but the origin is psychological rather than physical. Proponents of this theory point to the conditions in Strasbourg in 1518, the famine, the disease, the religious terror, the crushing poverty. A population that, desperate, living under that kind of pressure, was primed for exactly this kind of collective breakdown. A second theory involves ergot, a fungus that grows on rye grain and contains compounds chemically similar to LSD. Ergot poisoning, known as St. Anthony's fire, causes convulsions, hallucinations, and involuntary muscle spasms. If the city's grain supply was contaminated, mass poisoning could explain the compulsive movements. But critics point out that ergot poisoning typically causes paralysis rather than dancing, and that the outbreak spread to people who may not have eaten from the same grain supply. A third explanation proposed by some researchers is simply that it began as a deliberate act, that Frau Troffea was making a religious statement or a protest, or had simply lost her mind, and that others followed out of social contagion, not illness. None of these theories fully explains every detail, and none of them explain why it stopped. The dancing plague of 1518 was not the only outbreak of its kind. Similar events were recorded in the 10th, 11th, 13th, and 14th centuries across Europe. Groups of people seized by uncontrollable movement, unable to stop, sometimes for days. The last major outbreak occurred in 1840. After that, nothing. The phenomenon simply disappeared from history. What it leaves behind is a question that medicine and history have never fully answered. What happens to a human body when the mind breaks under enough pressure? What does a society do when the suffering it cannot name begins to move through people like a wave? Frau Troffea walked into a street in Strasbourg one July morning and started dancing. Within weeks, people were dying around her. She never explained why she started, and nobody who came after her could explain why they couldn't stop. What do you think caused it? Leave your theory in the comments. I read every one. Law and shadow. The law runs deep.